all of time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
Hi, this is Mark, and welcome to All of Time and Space. We have reached the end of an era. It's the end of the William Hartnell years. So we decided we would get some friends together and have a chat about what makes this period of the show such an interesting and unusual one. And we'll be back with our special guests after this.
William Hartnell was a spiky sort of figure on paper, but there was something about him I thought that was quite magical, a sense of the fairy tale. He was someone who could open a gateway to a magical world, whether it be deep in the forest or deep in space. He could take you there. And although he was impatient and short with people, you knew that was because he was quite tough. And you knew he had to be tough to do what he did. So he knew that he could protect you as well. Anyone who watches William Hartnell now will be watching him on a DVD or whatever, on the internet, whatever. And it will all look very old, but to us, it was brand new. And also, it was only ever meant to be watched once. It just went out on a Saturday night, and that was it. It was over. And he just brought a sort of magical spirit to it. My memory of it was not really as a sort of science fiction program, but as a more fantastical and almost fairy tale-like show. And he was certainly one of the main reasons for that.
And welcome back. And joining us for this momentous occasion, we have two guests for you. In no particular order, we have Victoria from the Gallifrey's Most Wanted podcast. Hi, Victoria.
Hello.
And we have Tim from the Missing Episodes podcast. Hey, Tim.
Hello.
Thank you both so much for joining us.
Well, you're very welcome. It's an honour to be asked on what is, it sounds like a really nerdy in-podcast comment this, but it's an honour to be on the best edited and sounding podcast there is.
Wow, that's very kind of you to say so, Tim.
Although, I'm a bit disappointed that we're not actually in a TARDIS and that lovely background hum is in fact you just sat next to a big fridge.
That's not too far from the truth, actually. I'm right next to the kitchen door, but anyway.
Lovely to be here.
It's an honor to be invited, yeah. I mean, old Who is not my thing necessarily, but pleased to be a participant.
Well, I figured, seeing as this is a pretty meaty subject, I'd get two really smart people on to make up for me and Ian, so let's see how that pans out.
It's actually Ian and I, if we're going to be dramatically.
Here we go. That's me putting my place.
Well, you know, I'm living up to my stereotype as the Essex blonde cretin guy.
Well, I mean, So yeah, it's the end of an era. I feel slightly bereft, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I bet. If to have done this all in order, this would be hard.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, you hadn't seen too much of this stuff going in, so did you have sort of preconceptions before we started as to what you were going to get, and did that drastically change as we went through them?
Oh, that's a belter of a question. I think going in, I had seen precisely An Unearthly Child and the Time Meddler, and that might be all of them. So,
wow.
I mean, there are other people out there who would know better than me. People who listen to the show and the undiluted rubbish that I come out with. I was expecting it to be. I kind of got exactly what I was expecting in that I knew it was kind of going to be a little bit all over the place, a little bit wild, not quite the show that we've kind of come to know and love. because it's become increasingly entrenched in the formula over the last 60 years. But I always knew that the Hartnell era was capable of wilder deviation and greater experimental approaches, which I think we got in spades. So while I was not massively surprised by the kind of narrative of the Hartnell era, I was very pleasantly surprised by just how watchable and enjoyable it is. Even for me, the missing episodes where I'm looking at, a few photographs that are recycled mercilessly.
Tim, I feel like this is a good time to introduce you into this conversation as we get onto the missing episodes, because you are
the time of missing episodes.
Yeah.
Well, just to agree with Ian, and I think he's hit the nail on the head there, in that it is a journey, the first 3 years, of just complete experimentation. It's an unlimited concept, isn't it? It's got unlimited potential. Yeah. You've got literally all of time and space to play with. And I think it's only this era that is determined to sort of explore that to its fullest. Obviously, there are pure historicals, as it were.
Yeah.
And they're soon abandoned. I don't know why, really. I mean, I think the idea that drama can't be wrought out of people being plunged into the past is a daft one, and I think this era does it very well and very variedly. And it's truly the era where, if this month's story isn't to your taste, then hang around, because there's going to be something extremely different. The next,
you really don't know what you're going to get 1 week to the next.
The next month, and I find it quite sad, really, that after this era, it does start heading at the end of this era and into the next one. It quickly settles on the formula, more or less. Vaguely futuristic sci-fi ideas. But yeah, this one goes all over the show, doesn't it? Season 3's case, where the team behind the scenes have all changed.
Yes, there's just as much drama behind the scenes as there is on screen.
Yeah, there is. But the stories that make it to screen go from, like, The Mythmakers, which is 3 episodes of sort of attempted high-minded comedy, and then Slaughter. And then you go to 12 episodes of Slaughter mixed with comedy Arabs and cricket scenes and comedy policemen. And then the next 4 episodes are a Slaughter. It's just experimental and brilliant, and it doesn't have any... You can't pigeonhole what it's trying to do. And I don't like all of it, and I don't think all of it's successful, but it really tries very hard to explore all of that idea of all of time and space, which is fantastic. And it's sad that it doesn't ever reach for that again. I won't say it achieves it, but it doesn't reach for it again in the same way.
Tim, I think that's highly unusual. You're a Doctor Who fan and you don't like some of Doctor Who.
Well, listening to your podcast over the year, I've sometimes shouted at my phone and said, "No, you're wrong! You're wrong!"
Yes, you won't be alone.
but that's the beauty of the format, in that, some of my friends absolutely adore The Chase.
They're
I
right.
can't bear to watch it.
Oh dear.
But there's something for everyone, and that's what is brilliant about this era of the show. It is unlimited in its ambition. So yeah, it's sad when it's over for that.
Victoria, you're a self-confessed new Who fan. So although you've seen quite a lot of old Who now, thanks to your podcast that you do with Ross. What, coming into particularly the Hartnell era that you've seen, how did you kind of take to that, having been used to watching the newer stuff? Was it a bit of a jolt?
Well, no.
Going back to it, or
no,
not?
because, and anybody who has listened to our podcast knows that Ross has been on about this show since I met him, which was in 1987. And so he's not shut up about this show. And it wasn't until Doctor Who made it to Netflix that I finally just broke down and watched it. So I'd listened to him natter on for how many years, but I knew there was something to it. But I knew that there was a fandom, and I also knew a lot of the different facts. And I started watching the stuff before we started the podcast. I had finished what had aired, and I was looking for more. And so he gave me some DVDs, and we watched Unearthly Child together, and then we talked about the budget. And when you break down the numbers, the 1963 numbers of what they were given and what they made with it, it's a phenomenal achievement. And that's to Tim's point. I mean, I think that they challenged themselves and they accomplished something wonderful. This team behind the scenes, that they came out with, for the most part, quality stories. That weren't derivative. Necessarily. That this wasn't about just, and later on that happens, and later on in this first Doctor's run, you start to see things that are really derivative. But something like the Aztecs, that's, unheard of in television history. And what they were what they were attempting, what I think they succeeded in. And over again, the quality level of the storytelling, and that they didn't accept less than for a very long time. And, I think the other thing about it is they were doing something very intentional with the casting. Because I've said this before, Barbara Wright is unheard of in television. There's just are no middle-aged school marms, like 30-something school marms who are the moral center of the show, and that what she brings to it and what she drives in terms of the story over and over and over again continues to just amaze me, because I think I'm not alive until some of the second Doctor stories. I was born in 1966. And so, but I was watching television that had been made in these years, right? With all we had whole channels that would just play rerun television, syndicated television shows. And so an awful lot of what I saw were those Gilligan's Island sort of years and mid-60s television. And in the U.S., we had nothing like a Barbara Wright or a Liz Shaw. We had nothing like that.
It was incredibly groundbreaking, wasn't it, when it first started out? I mean, you had the whole...
And so intentional.
Yeah.
Right? Barbara's role...
The dynamic behind the scenes as well. You've got, this brash Canadian coming in and shaking things up at the BBC. And then you've got Waris Hussein, who's hired as the first director. You've got a woman who's the producer. First time that's happened at the BBC. Yeah,
and
exactly.
She's Jewish. I mean, and she felt that. Hussein, and Hussein talks about seeing, and I couldn't find it, I looked for it. But he talks about seeing Hill and Wright with their heads together, talking about what they wanted out of that character and what role they wanted her to play. It's, I think a lot of the quality of this is down to Verity, because when she leaves, like the Mythmakers is her last story.
Yeah.
And when she leaves, we start to get things like the Gunfighters. which is derivative, right? It's Cat Ballou, you know, which wasn't even a year old when that one was shot.
Yeah.
I think it's really derivative, and it's just hard to watch.
Oh, I love the gunfighters so much. I really do. But I won't wrestle you to the
Okay,
ground.
but it's the American accents that are hard. Okay.
Yeah,
that's fair
that's
enough.
the problem with it. That's the problem with it. But it's yet another story that ends in a massacre, isn't it? In season 3.
Right.
Can I just agree with you on Barbara? Absolutely criminally underrated, forgotten about. There was a on Radio 2 in 2013, there was a 50th anniversary celebration of Doctor Who, and they had William Russell and Carol Ann Ford on there, and maybe a Richard Martin or one or two others, and they didn't mention Barbara or Jacqueline Hill once.
Good grief.
Or they may have mentioned her once as a throwaway, but they certainly didn't discuss either the actress or the character. And I don't hold that against them, because they've spoken of her many times, but she is forgotten and overlooked, and I think she is the absolute glue in those first 2 years. And for a kids show, some of the threats she faces and overcomes, very often dodgy physical, sexual threats and so on, and the way she overcomes them, and both the character and the actress are superb. She is my favourite 60s companion, perhaps my most admired companion.
Mine too. I can't imagine what it would have been
she's
like
marvellous.
to have in this era when there's so much discussion about having ourselves reflected. Right. I mean, the only time I ever saw myself on television was Velma. Velma's the pretty one. Who's the one in Scooby-Doo that's with the glasses? Right.
That's Velma.
Yeah,
Daphne?
but that's Daphne. No, Daphne's the pretty one. It's Velma.
Yeah,
Velma with the
Velma's
glasses. But that was the only time I ever saw myself reflected on television at all. The smart girl.
Jinkies.
Yeah, well, the smart girl, right?
Yeah.
And Barbara and Liz, Liz Shaw with her multiple degrees and things. I never saw a woman on television like that. I mean, I think the best we got was, the Bionic Woman. And she was only spectacular because, there'd been operations. But no, I'm glad to hear that y'all see that too. And I was watching the Romans this week, and she's hiding, Nero's chasing her around coffee tables, right? And I mean, and you think, how would you respond in that circumstance? This guy can have you killed in the moment, he's so powerful. How would you have handled that? But I reflect a lot on who's behind the scenes and who's making these decisions. As I'm watching these years.
I mean, obviously, Barbara is just such a huge part of that initial TARDIS team, but we have to also acknowledge one of our favourites, Ian Chesterton.
So I'll be right back. I think there's a delivery. I'll be about 2 minutes. You guys knock yourselves out.
Yes, he's not for everyone, is he? But I think they work as such a really nice couple, don't they? I think, anyway.
I mean, you have to have the action man,
Yeah.
When you've got an old man. I think we determined the other day that the actor was Ross's age.
Oh, wow.
That was fun.
He was thrilled about that, I'm sure.
But, I mean, he's an older man, and you have to have the action man. And so you've got to have somebody who takes the punch.
Yeah.
Right. I get that. And unfortunately, like, all Carol Ann Ford was given to do was scream.
Oh, boy.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, that first story, she comes across as this sort of otherworldly and really interesting character, but that never really develops from there, does it?
No.
Which is a shame.
It is nice that they help Vicky through, right?
Uh-huh.
With a much better role, right? She's just given thoughts.
And they get it right straight off the bat as well.
They do.
Obviously, somebody's been taking notes about the Susan character as they get ready for that switch over. Because for me, she just hits the ground running. She's such a great character.
Yeah.
Certainly one of my favourites from this run.
Yeah.
I think that's what we said at the time, isn't it? They had 8 or 9 stories with Susan having absolutely zero development or agency, really, or, real individuality. And then the very next story, they go and demonstrate that they could have been doing that all along. They just chose not to. And
also, I think a lot of it comes down to Maureen O'Brien as well, what she brings to that part. Because you could have had, no offence to some of the other younger female companions, but I don't know, she just has that spark, and she really...
Well, and she has the spark with Hartnell, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's clearly chemistry there.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly something, there is a spark of energy that pings back and forth off the two of them, and it works. And like, it's like, in Modern Who, we talk about the Danny Pink arc, right? And that's not there, right?
Yeah.
The chemistry part is just not there. And I think maybe that was true with Hartnell and Carol Ann Ford. But it certainly is improved for whatever set of reasons when Maureen O'Brien comes in. She's great.
I mean, she would have been the perfect casting to play the Doctor's granddaughter in some ways. She's got that kind of aloof, elfin,
exactly what I was going to
magic,
say.
Inquisitive, sparky, lively, curious, calm, seasoned,
adventurous.
Adventurous.
Yeah.
She was just magnificent. And imagine if the part of Susan had been written in the same way. I mean, we could have got 5 years plus. She might still be in it. Who knows? But, but yeah, hats off to Vicky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's if you imagine Susan's guardian. So in a parental way, the Doctor is a guardian, and I kind of think Vicky is the grandchild who the parent is really good with when they're not so good with their own kids. If you know what I mean. But yeah, it is odd because Carol Ann Ford, she absolutely adored William Hartnell. But I think there's this tension all the time, isn't there, between what Carol Ann Ford wanted the part to be, and what it was. But also, she is quite annoying.
There's no getting away from it, is there? Really?
To be fair, but Ian can be annoying as well.
No,
I don't hold.
Really?
I don't hold the same amount of hatred for him that this Ian does. But when you've got two companions who aren't really firing on all cylinders for me, Ian's doing what he's doing. Like Victoria said, he's the action man. You've got Susan, who's doing everyone's head in by all accounts, and the Doctor, who is quite a difficult character.
The Doctor or William Hartnell?
The Doctor, who is quite a difficult character early on, especially. He's a murderous coward, isn't he? Again, I don't want to labour the point, but you go back to this, I think Victoria said, centred character that is Barbara, who holds it all together. It all reflects back on her so well. But yeah, Vicky I love, and she has a twinkle as well, and a tremendous sense of fun that comes through. And she lights up the screen, doesn't she? Every time she's on.
Another big takeaway for me, just seeing it all in order, is, people have talked about it before, but it's much more apparent when you see that sort of growth in the Doctor. As you say, he starts off as this really quite brash and not very likeable character, and then as the seasons go on, he becomes, through his experiences and I think through sort of interacting with his human companions, it takes some of those sharp edges off and he becomes a much more likeable character.
Is it at the Aztecs? Is it the hot chocolate and the older woman? Is that where it happens? Because it's all like he starts with his little, like his little chuffed noises, I don't think he does it in Keys of Marinus.
Yeah, maybe, or possibly The Rescue, where he has that moment with Vicky, doesn't he, where he sits down and he reassures her, and he's got this real kind of paternal or avuncular character about him, and he's just being very protective and very kind, and I don't know. That's a standout moment.
He's playing around in Planet of the Giants, right? He's crawling in and out of sink and plumbing and things.
Uh-huh.
And he wants to solve the mystery in that one. And Sensorites too. He's a little bit more, doing his little chuffed noises and
chuff noises, love it.
And I think, but yeah, certainly by the time Vicky comes, he's there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it may. I think in Sensorites even he's like, I think it's not Keys of Marinus, because that's just all of those confusing hallways. Right? It's like a hall of mirrors. I mean, it's a good looking set, but it's a weird.
I love Keys of Marinus. I think that's such a really fun story that it really tries to push the envelope with a relatively small budget. The ambition is huge. It doesn't necessarily reach it, but hats off to them for trying.
Mm-hmm. No, I wrote all of these down, and I was looking at them, and I'm like, there's not really a dog in in season 1.
No.
And any season of any television show, you can have one dog, right? Like you can have one that's not great. And with season 2, it's clearly, you can tell with the Vaseline on the lens that Web Planet, they knew it was a dog going out.
Oh, them's fighting words. Ian is a big fan of that one.
I don't mind the story. It's just distracting that I can't see anything.
I think I'm led to believe, I haven't personally done this, but I'm led to believe if you go back now and you watch the Christopher Eccleston series on one of today's incredibly amazing widescreen TVs, there's that similar kind of slightly blurry, smeary quality, and I did not bump on that with the Web Planet. It's in my. I'm not gonna go ahead and reveal anything, but I've got a few top stories. I've got a couple of bottom stories, and the Web Planet is in my top few tales. So, yes.
Top 20 or 30.
Top some. I think going back to what you were just saying, the arc the First Doctor goes through is not dissimilar from the arc that Colin Baker wanted his Doctor to go through, and again with Capaldi. It's a gradual mellowing, and I think Capaldi got it right. I think Hartnell got it right, but that was probably more of an evolutionary thing than a conscious decision, because it wasn't like he was coming to this part thinking, well, how am I going to play the Doctor? He was just the Doctor, and what we saw was just that human response to those stories, and Hartnell thinking, well, maybe I wouldn't be quite so tetchy anymore. Maybe by this point I feel more parental, I feel more of a guardian to these people. Maybe I'm going to play it and he'd have been responding to feedback and reviews as well, so it was kind of watching someone honing the role in real time.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, let's not forget that this era, the lead is being pulled in more directions than any other era of the show. The genres that this era attempts, straight sci-fi, silly kids sci-fi, high-minded comedy, farce, musical comedy almost with the gunfighters, and the Doctor, the William Hartnell's requirements by those stories need him to be quite different. Donald Cotton's Doctor in the Mythmakers and in the Gunfighters is written as a straight man to other people's comedy, but Dennis Spooner's Doctor, written in the Romans, is a farcical clown, and I think this is overlooked on the demands of the leading actor, and how successful he is. Don't get me wrong, I know he makes mistakes, but I think the demands on him as this show is being contorted and pulled in all different directions while it works out what it wants to be.
Yeah.
I think that affects his
I think
character
that's an amazing
as well.
point,
And
because
Yeah, I agree.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking ahead, maybe 1 or 2 doctors. I'm not going to elaborate, but certainly very quickly we get to a doctor where the kind of the tonal consistency is absolute, and there might be the occasional moment of, I don't know, the occasional moment of charm perhaps, but there's certainly no sense of him being, in a different genre month in, month out. And you're right, it's such a different role and responsibility for a performer to have, to be that versatile, and without really stepping outside the chalk circle of who your character is. You can be a straight man, you can be a righteous, furious, menacing figure of vengeance like he is in that marvellous scene at the end of The Rescue. He can be a sort of innocent explorer, he can be a slightly bad-tempered old, skull crusher, but he is able, as you say, to just fit into whatever is happening around him in a way that
he doesn't always nail it.
No,
I mean,
he
he's
doesn't
not always
nail it,
entertaining when he does it.
But he tries.
He tries.
He
Yeah.
tries.
I think it's also a big thing for Hartnell as well, for him as an actor, because he'd been so typecast previously as being the sort of gruff sergeant major type. He was always going to be the heavy, with the odd exception. That was his kind of typecasting. So for him to come into this towards the end of his career and have this character that can really be anything must have been a real joy for him to be able to just, as each script came in, this week it's a farce, this week it's a historical drama, this week it's science fiction.
In one of your podcasts, I can't remember which, but you asked the question about fluffs and how much of the Doctor, how much of the Doctor's character was William Hartnell's performance. I was led by conventional fan wisdom most of my life, and then I'd seen like Carry On Sergeant plenty of times, and you don't glean a lot from that.
No.
I'd seen This Sporting Life, but that's a real character piece, so you don't really get a lot from that. But what was really revealing was a number of years ago now, it's probably around 2014, 2015, they found the Desert Island Discs.
Oh yeah, that was really good.
Where he's probably talking with put on airs and graces, but he's unrecognisable from Doctor Who. Completely unrecognisable. He's erudite and has a different tone to his voice, and I didn't even recognise him. I thought when I heard the clip it was actually the presenter at first, and then you think, no, that is him. And I'd never really appreciated how much of a character piece it is, just developing the sort of the core character, who then has to be pulled everywhere. And it's confusing because some of his fluffs are fluffs and some of them aren't, and you just wonder whether, like I guess like Jeremy Brett embodied his Sherlock Holmes so much it took over. I sort of wonder whether playing a dotty old man made him into a dotty old man. I don't know, but I think it's an underrated performance by him for sure. Not always successful, but certainly underrated.
Yeah, I think the only actor that I know, I'm sorry, didn't get given that range that you've just described is Troughton. And in some ways, maybe he was given that range, and we're not exactly sure. But it does feel with the Troughton era like they go into Base Under Siege, so quickly, and that he's not given as much to do. But it's what I love about what I see in what I've been able to see in Troughton's performance is the spin on a dime, switch from comedy to anger right in the same moment. And it's the thread of what I see, and everybody can can do this on their own, but I see a thread that connects 2 and 7 and 10 to exactly what you've described. And it's the range that was originally set by Hartnell. Right,
Yeah, comparing the two, I sort of feel that Hartnell's being pulled around by it and trying to react to all of these different stories that are being thrown at him.
Yeah.
Whereas Troughton, they've settled on, the formula, as Ian said at the start. And so, because he is such a good actor and because he's such a fine clown, he can just build on that. I'd much rather watch Patrick Troughton on the screen than I would William Hartnell.
Right.
But I think I respect what William Hartnell's having to do more than I do Patrick Troughton.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. But I wonder if Troughton saw all those different directions and incorporated them into his character. We have to be almost as grateful to Troughton pulling it off and succeeding. Right, because if that had fallen on its face, we'd have nothing. Yeah. We wouldn't be here. But there is, having just gone back and watched them all, my gratitude level to Hartnell is high. Right, it's at an all-time high right now.
Yeah. I mean, another big takeaway for me going through this experience, growing up when I did in the sort of tail end of the 70s, early 80s, when I first started watching, I'm so familiar with the Tom Baker run and the stuff that came after that, yes, I'd seen bits and pieces of the 60s stuff, and by the time we came to record this podcast, when we started back in 2020, I'd seen it all, but in sort of piecemeal in bits and pieces. And just the sheer variety that's there to enjoy each week. I think Tim had mentioned, it's just one of those things where every story is just something new and different to enjoy, and I really have taken that as a big plus point of enjoyment from watching this early phase of the series.
I also find it really interesting that in general, and we've touched on this already, we've moved away from characters and we touched on Victoria touched on sort of production values, but I find it really interesting, and I found it really good training, if you like, in my formative years, that you watch in a show that is all about the strength of ideas and concepts, and you get the feeling that it was slightly unloved by the BBC, made on a pittance of a budget, and there's always this tension between interesting new ideas coming through for how to tell an adventure in time and space, be it in the future and the past, be it derivative or not, or whatever, and the firing rookie directors at it, and sometimes by virtue of these rookie directors, sometimes it absolutely falls flat on its face. Probably some of Ian's favourite stories, but other times, with all that heat and smoke around, you get some really great directors finding their feet. Like Waris Hussein, who's trying all different not new, but innovative ways of shooting things, and of course Douglas Camfield. I think if the era doesn't stand up to modern audiences now, or if a story doesn't stand up to a modern audience, it's because of these raft of rookie directors, because do you know what I mean? It feels quite unloved. So you just got these rookie directors trying to do all sorts, and that's a success or failure of it on a production side of things. But the stories and the ideas always shine through, and so it trains you to get used to cheap television as you start your Doctor Who journey, and I think it's a triumph for that, and I think that's why Doctor Who fans are winners, because we haven't had the luxury of all this money being thrown at it.
What you're saying, I think, if I can summarise, is that Doctor Who fans have a depth that other dare I say, more shallow television viewers don't have, because we really have to work hard to buy into this universe and see it despite its production shortcomings, whereas,
Correct.
other people, they're just rubbish. I think it's interesting to go right back to something you said almost at the top of the show about, the Hartnell era is unique to a pretty large degree. The historicals, there's one more historical to come after Hartnell goes. As we've talked about the budget, we've talked about the production, surely it's always going to be cheaper to make a historical rather than to make 10 android costumes. So you have to really wonder why the show moved away from this really good, it's a brilliant storytelling paradigm. Production-wise, it must have been an absolute boon if they thought, oh, great, we've only got to make a cave for this episode. That'll save us a few bob.
Or wheel out medieval France from the props department.
Absolutely.
Right. I think particularly for BBC.
Yeah.
Right. Doing historicals would be a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think sadly they weren't Dalek stories.
Right, it really is.
That's how they made their money, and that's what got all the attention in the press. And I think probably, without having thought about this really before, but that's probably why they settled on Monster of the Week, because they were the things that the youngest audience enjoyed the most, and the things that they could publicise, that the press would be more interested in photographing and publicising the show. And you know what? When I was a kid, I far preferred monsters to historicals. But absolutely. I'm very lucky in that many years later, it's still sustaining me and keeping me interested, because I'm more favouring the stories now, which as a kid I thought would have been dry as toast. So I think that's why they went there. I would guess that's why they went there. I think it's a shame. So on the one hand, when we're saying our fandom is the best fandom since Moses,
his fandom.
On the other hand, I think we're the worst
each other
as well.
Not my Moses. And oh god.
Yeah.
Well, just looking at season 1, you see Unearthly Child, Marco Polo, Aztecs, and Reign of Terror, right?
Yeah.
And you see Daleks, Edge of Destruction, which is one that I enjoy. I enjoy because it's a psychological sort of drama, much more so than a monster. It's more of a thriller. But you've got Edge of Daleks, Keys of Marinus, and Sensorites, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very evenly balanced. And then with season 2, Planet of the Giants, which is that 60s trope of shrink them down. Daleks, Rescue, Romans, Web Planet, the aforementioned Web Planet, then Crusades. So you've got Romans and Crusades separated only by Web Planet, then Space Museum, and The Chase. So Daleks get 2 stories in season 2.
Yeah.
And I think in season 3, Dalek Master Plan might as well have been 2 stories to have been 12 episodes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's to the TV viewer. That's 3 straight months of Daleks by the time you get to Dalek's Master Plan. And surely someone might have been thinking, well, let's pull back from this. Let's do William the Conqueror.
But the Daleks Master Plan came about because...
Who was it? There was someone at the BBC that their Auntie Flo, yeah.
So Hugh Weldon was... Yeah, the Daleks Master Plan came about because Hugh Weldon, who was in a senior position, his mother-in-law, who's called Mrs. L.G. Stroud, wanted more Daleks on the TV. So that's how that's how the 12-part, 13-part came about. But so if you go from like the start of The Chase to the end of the Daleks Master Plan, that's a loss of Daleks on television. And I've met people. I've met a person, my friend's mum, just thought it was Doctor Who and the Daleks. Just thought the TV show was only Daleks from her childhood memory.
That was Catherine Tate's position, wasn't it? Or that was the quote that was attributed to her when she joined the show full time, was that she'd also assumed it was Daleks every single week. And
Yeah.
maybe for the 4 months she was watching in the 60s, it absolutely was, and you can't fault her logic.
Yeah.
But yeah, there must have been someone's mother-in-law at the BBC who wanted to see a 4-parter where King Harold gets his eyes shot out and William the Conqueror. I don't want to seem like an obsessive about William the Conqueror. It's just the first historical that's occurred to me that they could have done, but they really should have done that.
They mention it, right? He gets mentioned in Time Meddler.
That's right.
Sure, it gets
'Cause it's-
mentioned.
Yeah, no, promises, right? You never deliver.
I think this is an opportune moment to drop in a bit of feedback we had. Victoria, I don't know if you're aware of this gentleman. He goes by the name of @Gallifrey Gothic on Twitter. Have you heard of?
Yeah, of course.
Heard of
That's
him?
our
Yeah,
friend
it sounds
Jeff.
vaguely familiar. That's it. Yes, Jeff Goddard. Hello, Jeff. Right, let's take a deep breath. This is a 3-tweeter. Jeff says, "I have so much to say, but I'll try to be concise." Well, let's see how that goes. The early years of Doctor Who are some of the most innovative, creative, and boundary and genre-pushing television ever made. This is a show that sprouts before your eyes and by the end of it has essentially formed into the model that would then hold true for most of the rest of its run. Without the commitment of the original cast and crew, the endless hours of work and sheer volume of storytelling, but most importantly the dedication and belief in it from Hartnell himself, it could have faded away to nothing. That almost 60 years later, we are here still discussing it, marvelling in it, and being swept away by the magic of it is testament itself. I love it. It's nothing but a joy and barely falters. But even when it does, it's still engaging. Pure, utter joy. Wow.
Yeah,
How'd you follow that?
He's the first Doctor stan, right? Like he can't get over Hartnell. It's his warm fuzzy, and he's the one who was telling me that I watched all of this stuff a long time ago. Everything through once, and with the reconstructions, and that was my error. That as we've been going back through this, I've been reading the books. Because and I didn't get a chance to do that for the missing episodes for this conversation. I would have liked to. I did do the BBC audio of Dalek Master Plan.
That's a good one.
But yeah, I need, and that's personal. I need to not look at a still picture of a rolling silver ball, from the Abominable Snowman. I need to have the images in my head, and so reading the Target novelizations for the missing episodes is really helping me.
Yeah.
But so I think once we started getting into that missing episodes, and Vicky, what didn't strike me the first go round, and Jeff was the one who told me that I needed to go back and rewatch with a different pair of eyes and see what, and he's absolutely right, 100%. She's really a revelation.
Yeah. She's great. I mean, there is a bit of a double-edged sword if you go to the Target books, having experienced that myself as a young nipper reading them at primary school. Quite often the budgets are a lot bigger in the Target books, and so when you come around to actually watching the episodes themselves, it can sometimes feel a little bit deflating, but no, they're great, and
sometimes
just an element of the fandom.
Sometimes they're like a page one rewrite of what was seen on the television as well. The Massacre in particular, the Mythmakers and the Romans. They're written in a completely brilliant but different style to how they were realised.
No, I really thought that Marco Polo had been the one that I wanted to be found, right? Everybody's got an opinion about which one they want, the missing episode they want to have found. And after reading the book, what I realized is that I was able to visualize real Asian people. And that we might, if we find Marco Polo, the cringe factor might be really high. So that was my turnaround. I was like, oh, yeah, maybe there is something to be said for some episodes staying gone. I still would like to see.
That said, they did have some Asian actors in the cast.
They did.
So,
They had a
It's a
couple.
bit ahead of its time.
Yeah. Well,
in some respects.
from the stills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because it was an industry standard at the time to black up or
Yeah.
use makeup. There are very few instances where somebody playing an Asian character does it in a mocking way.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of them is in Marco Polo, but I don't personally find issue. I mean, I'm a middle-aged white male, so it's not really for me to say. But with Bernard Kay playing Saladin in The Crusade, he's giving that 100% earnestness. There's no disrespect there. Yes, we have to consider the problems with casting, but there's no disrespect given to who he is portraying in that. I think there is a comedy Chinese character in Marco Polo, isn't there? But yeah, it's quite a difficult one to approach from 60 years down the line in a fair way,
right,
I think.
to anybody else, right? Like I'm used to seeing, right? At my age, I'm used to seeing Italians and Jews playing Native Americans, right? Like we had just horror with that. And Doctor Who's never bad about it. Never. And I don't know what that's... I don't know how to attribute that other than they seem to be conscientious. Whereas Hollywood has never been good about it. So, yeah, it's no...
I think they are. I think conscientious is a good word. It does drop the ball sometimes, and there are some egregious things in there which stick out. But I tend to think that relative to what else was being put out at the time,
right,
I think Doctor Who was heading in the right direction. And so my instinct is that it may be a mistake to be too prosecutorial about the content in Doctor Who, because relative to other stuff that was going out at the time, for instance, the Black and White Minstrel Show, which was a huge show on the BBC,
right,
which was egregious and was mockery. I think yes, let's point out what could have been done better, but remember that in the context of the time, it was probably quite
incredibly progressive.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it does drop the ball.
It never feels egregious. It never feels bad. But, we had a couple just at the beginning of the pandemic, I believe it was, that they did the Twitch live streams of Doctor Who. And you saw a lot of young people jumping on like the Hartnell and then the Pertwee, oddly, bandwagon. That there was an awful lot of fans of the show, of the new show, and going back and seeing old stuff for the first time. And those are the folks who will be prosecutorial about it, right? And who will, see that first, tweet about it. And there isn't a rational, reasoned response in those times. And that's when the cringe hits. And sitting next to my daughter watching these, she's watched all of New Who, and she has dipped in and out on old Who. And she, I don't know. I don't know how
a lot of it doesn't age well.
Yeah,
but
I don't
think
know.
it's important to keep it, or to, especially with younger viewers who are discovering it for the first time, or not necessarily younger viewers, but any viewers who are discovering it for the first time. I could show things on my my DVD collection, which are staggering in how the world has changed and how attitudes have changed. And yeah. Doctor Who is trying to be progressive, even though it does cock up from time to time.
It just moved off of the top of my list. of
Yeah.
ones I wish to be found. There's some other ones I think I might be more interested in now.
So, Victoria, which one would you like to come back?
Oh, I think Troughton probably. I would like to see. Is Abominable Snowman the next one that's being animated and being released? Is that going to be the last one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like it at the moment. Yeah.
That would be the one, because that's the worst of the reconstructions. That silver ball, and I'd like to see that silver, because the hardest part is that it's a good looking effect because of the amount of time they spend focused on that silver ball. Like, it's a cool thing to have a silver ball just rolling on its own down a hallway, stopping and turning a corner. What a great effect for 1966 or 7.
Yeah.
And so I'm fixated on that ball. That's part of my problem.
Well,
Is
we
that it's so
know
dumb.
Mark's also fixated on his balls, but
Yeah.
same question to you, Mark. But I'm gonna make you choose a Hartnell story. If you could have a missing Hartnell return from the ether, which one would you like to see?
Well, it's going to come as a massive surprise to anyone who listens
except
to this
the
regularly.
bloody Daleks' bloody master plan. We get it. You can have any story apart from that.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll go a little bit left field then. I remember really enjoying the Crusade when we did that one. So I know I suppose in terms of value for money, you've already got 2 episodes, so you're not going to get. It's not like having all of Master Plan back, but yeah, I think that could be a bit of an eye opener. So yeah, I'd quite like to see that one come back. Tim, can you choose just one to come back?
Well, what, serial?
Yeah.
Well, it'd be Dalek's Master Plan, just for the sheer number of episodes that we get. Something that's really missing. I mean, season 3 doesn't have telesnaps, and
The Savages.
I'd love to see the Savages, only because it feels really unknown. I'd love to see some of the Massacre, because it feels unknown. The thing about the Massacre and the Mythmakers are, I mean, I love the Mythmakers. I know you guys hated it, but that's fine. But it's probably my favourite story at the moment. Anyway, it will change. But the thing is, they stand up so well on audio by themselves. I'm a bit nervous of especially the Mythmakers. The Massacre stands up well on audio as well, but I'm a bit nervous of one of those being found in case it's shit. In case the realization really
I think
lets
that
it down.
story's only improving. Because it's intrinsically a fascinating story. I think it was done well. Trying to judge it off of a few photographs is where, for me, it lost points. I think it could be brilliant. I mean, the horse looked amazing. Let's assume everything else probably looked amazing as well.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I tend to, rather than watch recons these days, I tend to just listen to them walking to work, the narrated audios, and then your imagination is unbound then, isn't it? You can imagine things to be as good or as poor as you like. But something that I'd like something to come back that is really missing, like the Savages, that we don't know. That is harder to imagine exactly how it looks, even though we do have a few bits.
Just fragments, really.
Yeah.
Just fragments.
The Massacre, would be one you mentioned, and Eric Thompson, who is Emma Thompson's father, is the star of that one, or he's the guest star, and he did virtually children's programs, and like an episode of Coronation Street or something, and but I'm so curious to see him because his child's brilliant, and a brilliant actor and screenwriter, and his wife's a brilliant actor, and like there's so much about but there's, and it's given the opportunity to see Hartnell do that dual role, do the doppelganger role, I think would also be fascinating to see.
Yeah.
I'd love to see part 1 of The Smugglers. I'd really like to see that. I've listened to that quite recently, and as part ones go, it's superb, really good, and it's a swan song for
I'm
Hartnell.
assuming Ian's choice would be Celestial Toymaker.
Toymaker is unique. I think any of the other missing stories might be a lot better than we've given them credit for. I think Toymaker only gets worse if we can watch all 4 parts of that. I would also go Mythmakers or The Savages. Mythmakers because I want it to be brilliant. I want it to be the best story ever. The Savages because I suspect it's still terrible. But it would be nice to have that confirmed.
The Celestial Toymaker is the epitome of a show that has lost the plot completely. It's having seizures in season 3, isn't it? You've got, I think there are 4 writers on the Celestial Toymaker. It's completely lost its original concept.
Yep.
They're trying to kill off their lead actor. by simply not inviting him to record. It's just a complete breakdown of everything that was successful about the first 2.5 years, and it is surprising and wonderful that it recovered from that chaos in season 3. And perhaps explains why they went to something safe and formulaic, but it is complete breakdown of something that was only 2.5 years before, that started on this steady, wonderful, brilliant path. It's quite amazing how something can go quite so kaput.
Just unravels, doesn't it?
It's bonkers. The worst thing that happened for the Celestial Toymaker was an episode of it was found. People could see it. It's poor television.
Yeah,
it's a shame because Michael Gough is a really good actor, and I feel like he's a bit wasted there, really.
Funnily enough, I watched an episode of Colditz the other day, and Michael Gough was in it, and he was wasted in it. He was an alcoholic. But yeah, it's a shame because it's a nice spooky concept, isn't it? But it just had so many rewrites. Brian Hales is nowhere near it by the time it makes it to screen. But yeah, it survived. It survived the Celestial Toymaker.
Yeah.
And then the Gunfighters, which I love, wasn't popular, and it survived that as well. So yeah. Good on you, Doctor
Who.
Who.
Like perhaps we need to give the Gunfighters 30 seconds in the sun, because we loved it as well, and obviously we're coming at it from we not every TV show we were brought up watching was a US television production. We're not that, but we know the accents are shit, but we can still enjoy them for what they are. It was a wonderful and very innovative with the music, and I know that's contentious, but it was just a really innovative 4 episodes. Again, it was comedy, there were musical elements, it was and we all thought it was a really strong story. Even Dodo, who is very much the dodo in the room as far as this conversation goes so far. Everything about that was fantastic. So that's my 30-second defense of the Gunfighters. I
think my affection for it springs from the fact that you've got Hartnell, who is struggling, and they're trying to get rid of him. He's barely in the Massacre. He's barely in the Celestial Toymaker. His health is failing, and then he gets this Donald Cotton script. At least half of it's Donald Cotton anyway. The second half is more Rex Tucker, I think. But you get this Donald Cotton comedy character again, and he absolutely nails it from start to finish. Yeah. He's a straight man, but he gets to show off physical timing. There's a bit, with the gun. Everyone keeps handing me guns, and all of that sort of fun is there. There's a bit where he nearly leans on the dead barman and does a double take, and it's just really, really nice to see a character who is struggling and who isn't loved, probably by his own hand, by the production team.
Yeah,
but just relaxing into a role where he can just show off his comedy chops.
Yeah,
it's really, really nice for that, and it's a great story for Dodo. We have very little Dodo, and she is she is fantastic in it. And Stephen's very game as well with what he has to do. I think that's what I like about Peter Purvis's performance. He's asked to do an awful lot, and I know, Ian, you're not fond of his shouting random words, but considering what he's asked to do, he is very, very game in every role in every story that he undertakes in his tenure. And he's very game with his singing and, with the comedy as well.
Yeah, I totally take my hat off to that bit of singing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Giving him credit for being game, absolutely. I think this is something that we try and remember on our podcast and talk about, is that this, and particularly this, was not shot for American audiences. But we... on the aforementioned television with the channels with just syndicated movies and shows, we had an overrun of Cat Ballou, which is a Jane Fonda vehicle with Lee Marvin, and it is exactly with the music and the comedy, and there would literally be two guys shuffle in. Stubby K, who's in
Delta and the Bannerman.
That Welsh. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Delta and the Bannerman. Yeah. He shuffles on and sings a song and then shuffles back off again, just like the overdub does in this one. So it's
Cat Ballou, and it's also Gunfight at the OK Corral.
Absolutely. So a lot of that stuff just felt overdone, and it probably wasn't shown to death, on BBC, right? So you guys weren't sick of it. And so and that's so this was not made for us, and the fact that
I think it is one of Stephen's better ones, to be fair. Ian, it brings me to, if you have to choose between Ian or Stephen, who's your fave?
Bloody hell. What's the jeopardy here? Do I have to spend any time with them?
While you're thinking that over, I've got some more feedback from Matt Barber at Matt Barber UK on Twitter, and they say, first thing that springs to mind is the magnificent characterization of Ian Chesterton. Really, the heart and soul of the show. He's amazing. Fighter, teacher, lover. What a performance. The whole show should have been called Ian Who. So, Ian or Stephen?
God almighty. So, Ian, to recapitulate some sentiments that I may or may not previously have expressed, is, I would say, somewhat insufferably pompous, rigid, unflappable, wears a blazer and tie. Just awful. Stephen is far less of a character. He's just whatever they need him to do that week. He wears some exciting woolens. He's supported admirably by the largest hair structure in, I believe, British television history. I honestly, I couldn't really choose between them. I think they're both exactly as egregious as each other.
Well, I can't say further than that, I suppose. We're getting towards the end of Hartnell's era, and we get some new companions. So out of the door go Dodo and Stephen, and we get Ben and Polly. We're finally getting, in terms of what we've seen so far, what Ian and I at least thought to be slightly more relatable characters as the companions. Tim, I'd be interested to hear what you think of them as companions.
Let's just go back to Dodo. What were they trying to achieve with Dodo? Because was she supposed to be a sort of hip 60s character?
They could never make their minds up, could they? Yeah. So they
Yeah.
introduce her as this sort of northern lass, and then that gets changed to a cheeky Cockney, and then she's
Then
a
back
very
to northern and so
RP,
on.
then,
Yeah.
poor woman. I don't know.
It
It's not her
seems
fault.
they don't know what they don't. There's this period of, again, this fascinating for me, season 3. They don't know what they're trying to do. They write in Katerina, then they write her out before she's shot a scene. The first scene she records is her death.
Yeah.
So they're floundering around. They don't really. Was Sarah Kingdom ever supposed to stay on? I don't know, but they're floundering around.
I don't know why she didn't stay, though. I think there was a conflict with the Smart's schedule.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. But so they're floundering around trying to find the formula, and it feels like when they get to the war machines that is the formula that they want to land on, even though they don't last very long themselves.
No.
But they're absolutely brutal, aren't they, with casting?
Oh God, yeah.
I remember in one of your episodes, I think Ian had a moment of sad reflection where it was either when Ian and Barbara left or when Vicky left. I think it was when Ian and Barbara left, where you felt it was the end of an era. You felt it was the end of this one long serial, this one long story of the family of characters going along and developing, and from that point it just becomes this sausage factory of companions. So I think they're interesting. I think they're fun. I like them both enormously. I don't think they're vaguely caricaturish, aren't they? But you think, they're a good, young, identifiable couple of characters. One for the girls and one for the boys, and then they're brutally axed after a couple of months.
Spoilers.
They're fine. They're great.
Yeah.
I love Annika Wills. She's absolutely wonderful. A lovely lady. Love her character. Love her performance.
And a great ambassador for the show.
Absolutely a great ambassador for the show. And they're very enjoyable. They're very light and frothy and bring what the show needs at that point. They're a good match for Troughton when he starts. But as they search for the formula, they're brutally axed. Yeah, I don't have much more to say about them, really. I'm sorry I can't give them more of an in-depth analysis, but they're great. I love the smugglers. I love that episode 1 where they're roaming around Cornwall and Polly thinks she's sussed it and the Doctor's just hanging back giggling at them, the young idiots. I love that storytelling. It's a perfect episode 1. I've changed my mind on what I'd most like to see. It's the smugglers in its entirety. Bring that back.
Okay. If you're listening out there and you've got it, come on.
You heard it here
Morris,
first.
hand it over.
But it was reflecting on all of that got me to the really got me to the Verity Lambert had a tighter fist on the control of things than maybe I'd previously thought, because it's Mythmakers is her last story. And it feels at some level like the wheels come off a little bit, with Katerina out the airlock. It's crazy,
Yeah.
And Sarah Kingdom seems like a great idea. And then there's just Dodo and Stephen, and it's just, the wheels are coming off is how it felt to me this time.
Yes.
Right. And that's always
it's as if they were panicking, they've got the character of Katerina and then they think, oh, she's not going to work in a futuristic story, let's kill her off. And then Sarah Kingdom doesn't travel because, what if we go back in time? How's she going to work in that? So we'll get rid of her as well. And there's this colossal flounder, and I think Ben and Polly, or Bell and Polly, I don't know how he identifies. Ben and Polly are the first companions to successfully espouse the era they're empirically from. And I feel like it's the first time the show stops being written by sort of older, stuffy white men who grew up writing TV in the 40s and 50s almost, and it kind of course corrects into a slightly more with it program. We're in 1966 by this point, and as I've said before, it takes any decade a good 4 or 5 years to kind of work out what it's going to be and start doing it. So I think this is the first opportunity the show has to really try something new. It hits it absolutely bang on. As we've said, Annika Wills is amazing. I love in the 10th Planet her attempts to sort of have a moral argument with the Cybermen, which is, kind of pissing up a waterfall, but give her points for trying.
For trying.
Yeah.
She's really brave.
And Ben is, full of pluck. So I absolutely love them. I think the
Right.
the companions.
He's full of pluck without being Ian.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose that if I'm trying to put my finger on it, that's the appeal of Ben. He's plucky, he's resourceful, strong, brave, but at the same time, he's not afraid to get a bit messy. He's not afraid to get a bit mucky. He doesn't wear a tie and a blazer.
No cardigans.
I mean, he dresses up like Popeye, but whatever.
No, and he looks up to Polly. That's a
that's because she's 6'2".
Right. But he knows she's smart.
Yes.
And he never once treats her like she's not.
That's true. There's none of that patronising lecturing that you get with certain other companions.
Yeah. No, it's the first time you actually see Dodo in what's available, complete. The first time you see her, Steven's lecturing her. You can't do that. You can't. Come on, man, loosen up.
You are so right.
And so, but you love about Polly. Polly does what you would have expected Barbara to do, which is make a cup of tea and let's sit down and you tell me all about it. And she's great at it because the character is good at doing that. And it's not because she's a woman, it's because she's always there to listen to somebody. She's always there. And from the very beginning, in War Machines, she's the good ear. She'll, pitch in to help out a friend. The character is drawn that way. And I know a college professor who was like the editor of, her name's Heather McHale, and she's very involved with Long Island Who, and I've seen her do presentations at other cons here on the East Coast, and she's was an editor of some sort of science fiction journal at one point, and she believes Polly to be one of the greatest characters, one of the greatest companions in Doctor Who, because she is doing the companion's job better than anybody else. She'll sit you down and get you to tell her what it is they need to know. And again, that was another one. Somebody said you got to watch this with a different perspective, and she's right. Cup of tea, make you feel better, then you spill your guts. It's great. And Ben is so respectful of her. He calls her the Duchess a bit, but he never talks down to her, and it's great.
It's playful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it works both ways as well.
Yeah, they are quite playful together. It's a nice dynamic.
And again, it's progressive, and it's perhaps the first really progressive dynamic in the TARDIS, because there has been that kind of slightly patronising male figure in one form or another for the previous 3 years.
Although the Doctor does get her brewing up in the moon base, doesn't he?
Well,
oh, Polly, why don't you make us some coffee while the men sort it all out?
But then she solves the mystery.
Isn't that human history in a nutshell, though? The men think they're in charge, and they think they know what to do, but actually we have not a bloody clue.
Bloody patriarchy.
If it weren't for the women actually fixing things in the background, we'd be buggered.
Yeah. And then there's Margaret Thatcher, right? There's always one that ruins everything.
She in it? Oh my God.
There's one that ruins everything.
She's very much the exception that proves the rule.
Okay.
Can I make one last point about something that's wonderful about the era and shouldn't be ignored? Sure. The music and the titles.
Oh, yeah.
That theme tune. The arrangement by Delia Derbyshire has helped that show survive for its initial 26 years, and then since then that piece of music and that arrangement is a really important piece of its success.
Absolutely.
It's I get really fascinated by the music, in particular during the historicals. So when you're off to Cathay and you're listening to this slightly stagey historical where they're following Marco Polo, and you've got this wacky sci-fi music at the start, this haunting music, bassy and electric and magical. It just lets you know that you're watching something seriously special, I think. And it's frightening and it's memorable and all the rest of it. There is a serious debt of gratitude that the entire show owes to that piece of music and its arrangement by Derbyshire. It's magic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even when they use stock music, their choices are bang on. You know, something like Space Adventure that they use for the Cybermen. That is just amazing.
Yeah.
They brought in new titles though for War Machines.
New episode in.
Yeah, they do that for a few stories around that time as well,
10th
don't
Planet
they?
has something different as well.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right to single out the music as being one of, I would say, two things from the era that have kind of guaranteed the show is still with us. Because I can't remember if it was Matt Barber or if it was something I read on the internet, but they described that opening credits as like your television is having a nervous breakdown. It utterly transports you out of your living room and into the into the deepest realms of the subconscious. But also, again, something they got absolutely right for episode 1, for the pilot, was the idea and the conception of the TARDIS. And the iconic nature of the police box and the jaw-dropping realization of the interior, the roundels, the console, it was just glorious. And if I had to think about it like a grown-up, I'd include a third concept, which is that of regeneration, but we're heading in that direction, so I'll leave that one for now. But as if and it can only have been luck, but two absolutely spellbinding, iconic things in one show in the pilot, that's got to be unprecedented, surely.
Yeah. Yep. You've got a couple of iconic things and you've got a concept without limit. And so it doesn't matter if you get it wrong for 4 weeks, because you can try something else the next 4 weeks. And it's such a winning formula, isn't it?
So Ian, you alluded to it. We've got to talk about it, haven't we, really? Regeneration.
Yes. I mean, not that it's billed as such or described as such, or I'm led to believe they sort of go into it in any great detail. From a production point of view, it's a fascinating thing. As we've spoken about already, it feels like they spent most of Series 3 trying to get rid of William Hartnell. Eventually, between the third and the fourth series, they kind of told him, enough's enough, mate, you're out. And then they did it in such a way as to... It feels like, if you try and bluff one of the Sopranos, they're going to pull a fast one and then look at you and go, yeah, what? What about it? And it's like the BBC did that with changing the actor of the Doctor. It was like, yeah, go, what? What are you talking about? No, it's always been this guy. No. Nothing to see here.
I just sent you all a tweet, something that Jeff put out. It was a picture of Hartnell as himself, but standing in the TARDIS and addressing a group of fans.
Oh, yes, I've seen that.
And then the one of Jodie from the recent con she was at.
Yeah, lovely.
Right? Like, great ambassadors for the show. Great, people who love what the show means to people.
I'll tell you what's fascinating. That picture of Hartnell in the police box, he really looks like David Bradley. And I wonder if we should somehow use that to springboard into the audio feedback.
Okay, well, let's hear what Ben has to say.
I'm going to be a little bit honest here. Sometimes it's hard for me to watch the first Doctor's era because on December 25th, 2017, my heart was kind of broken. Twice upon a time. Stephen Moffat's episode gave us a first Doctor who was nothing more than a sexist monster in a punching bag, played over and over and over as a symbol of everything wrong with past TV. And what little heart Moffat remembered to give this Hartnell stand-in by the episode's end was kind of too little and too late. The damage had been done, because I realized that for most every new fan of Doctor Who going forward, Twice Upon a Time was probably going to be their introduction to the first Doctor. Because, it's a lot easier to watch Twice Upon a Time than sit through a Recon of Daleks master plan. It's a lot easier to watch Twice Upon a Time's full-color HD high-def David Bradley version of the First Doctor than listen to a 7-episode soundtrack for Marco Polo. And let's be honest, it's a lot easier to watch Twice Upon a Time than sit through all of the Sensorites or the Web Planet. And man, that just breaks my heart. Not only is Twice Upon a Time's First Doctor wrong on a character level, it's just so mean-spirited, full of smug superiority about how, we're so much better today. And I disagree. William Hartnell was magic. And if you take the time to put in the work, the hard work, like Mark and Ian are doing to go from the very first scene to the very, very last, you truly see just how magic William Hartnell's First Doctor is. Sure, he's flawed, but how many times has William Hartnell's Doctor amazed you, made you cheer? How many times has he made you smile? And I think that's why my heart was broken on December 25th, 2017, because a brand new viewer's potential interest in checking out past Doctor Who would have that interest totally extinguished, because why bother? Past Doctor Who is obviously nothing but sexism and wrongthink. And that potential viewer, I would imagine, would then boycott the past and never get to experience all of the wonderful moments that the listeners to this podcast know exist. I don't know. I guess there's always hope that I'm basically overreacting, overanalyzing. You gotta have hope. And recons. So in closing, although it's been said many times, many, many ways, William Hartnell, you the man.
Excellent. Always good value for money, Mr. Schneider. Thank you for that.
And I'm so glad you didn't make me sing.
It's
still time.
It's very early days yet. We've got another 10 minutes to fill.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so that does sort of tie into where we're going, talking about the regeneration and the idea that it was this iconic moment that had been built up to, which really isn't the case. It was a throwaway moment at the end of the 10th planet, and it's since become part of our fan mythology that it was this planned for event, that the Doctor was regenerating, that Hartnell's face was blurring and changing, and that when David Bradley adopted the role in Twice Upon a Time or Once Upon a Chicken or whatever it was called, that's how you get away with the Doctor looking a bit different, because he's just started to regenerate, and there's this period where his face begins to blur and change. And just to talk about Ben's feedback specifically, I would agree with him, really. I think Bradley did a great... David Bradley, Mr. David.
That's better.
Did a great job playing the character as written. But yes, it's more of a kind of faintly acerbic lampooning of the Hartnell Doctor rather than a faithful attempt to recreate it. And it will be the entry point for a lot of fans. But at the same time, I think you should watch it, knowing that it's Moffat, knowing that maybe he's kind of satirizing what the First Doctor was like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also it's setting up for a regeneration where you're going to have a female Doctor, so that's obviously kind of playing into that as well.
Mm-hmm. But Bradley does a wonderful job in Adventures of Time and Space. Right? Like that character and characterization of both Hartnell and the Doctor are lovely and
really good.
But that's the difference, really, between Gatiss and Moffat. Right?
Yeah.
Because Gatiss is going to approach Old Who with the most respect and love. Right?
Yeah, in the Gatiss drama, he does touch some of the trickier issues of the time, and he does have Hartnell being prickly with a waiter or something, doesn't he? But he handles it deftly and with a light touch, and it's done well. And Moffat's come in with his sledgehammer and sort of cashed in on the mood of the time, and created a straw man to go into the female Doctor. And it's a shame, but I think enough has been spoken about it. I don't think there will be people going into it completely blind and thinking, oh, the whole of the first Doctor era was like that. It does seem a shame for William Hartnell and everything he put into it and all the love he gave it. That is his 21st century sort of caricature. But
putting a positive spin on it, it does mean that anyone who does kind of take the plunge and go and investigate is in for a really big surprise, and a pleasant one at that.
Yeah, for sure.
And like I said, they're showing it on Twitch. They're running Old Who in ways that, like, my daughter's generation is seeing it, and that's always positive, right? That there was a lot of engagement over that.
Yeah, I remember tuning in for some of those, and I wasn't really sure quite what the mood was going to be. I was kind of very prepared for people to be pointing at the dodgy effects or, the RP accents, but I was really pleased by just the way that it was embraced. And there
was a lot of joy, wasn't there? London 1965 and all that.
Seems like a world ago.
I wonder if it's because it was an era of the show that was more experimental, that it is something that's so kind of there to be discovered, and when people do discover it, they really enjoy it. I think a lot of other Doctors, you know what you're going to get. It's difficult to guess, but everyone of my age can maybe remember Tom Baker. They know the 80s Doctors. They've seen most of them. Younger people may not encounter those earlier Doctors without deliberately seeking them out, but I think in most of those cases you're not surprised by what you get until Andrew Cartmel and Sylvester McCoy. So the first Doctor's era is this kind of lacuna of what the WTF. I'll make it suddenly radio friendly. WTF. And that's a wonderful thing, and seeing people's joy and surprise at that is I think always going to be very heartwarming.
I hope so.
Well, I'd like to just quickly address the kind of schism in fandom. Normally at this point I'd make some sort of frivolous joke, but this time around I really want to get to the nub of this divisive. Do we refer to the William Hartnell Doctor as Firsty or Onesie?
It's got to be Onesie, hasn't it?
I'm happy to receive instruction on it.
Yeah, I think Australians are the ones who are always giving nicknames, right? I hear that when you go to Australia, you're immediately inundated with options for nicknames, and they would be much better than I at doing something like that.
Right, Ian, get Rob Irwin on the phone.
There you go.
I'll rummage into the time lapse if he's still down there.
He loves Davo. Well, shall we just sum up with our final thoughts on the Hartnell era? If we start with Tim first?
Well, we said so much, but yeah, I just reflect on it as a brilliant experimental era with some highlighted performances from Jacqueline Hill and Maureen O'Brien, and William Hartnell is vastly underrated. And while my favourite Doctor, and the one I'd rather watch on the screen, is Patrick Troughton, you don't have an Empire Strikes Back without Star Wars.
This is true. Nicely put. Victoria, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, other than to emphasize what's already been said so well by y'all, which is this was an incredible undertaking. The brief on it was an impossible task, and yet everything from the production company, the roundels, in the set design, and the Dalek, and the scope with which that they undertook to tell these stories and succeeded, right? There's always, like I said, there's always a dog, and sometimes that gets stuck in your brain, and yet there is so much success and so much high-level storytelling in these 3 seasons that it was shocking to me, even though I'd seen it all before. It was really how good these 3 seasons are, of what's available. Again, I didn't go down the large rabbit hole, what's missing, particularly in season 3, but what they accomplish, from the actors to the producer, what they accomplish is not just laudable, but really astonishing.
Excellent. Ian, anything else to add?
Well, I suppose I'd say, Onesie, as we've come to know him, wasn't a Time Lord. He wasn't Time's champion. He wasn't a madman with a box. He was just a heroic, engaged, scientist steeped in wanderlust. The kind of conduit for the stories to happen through him rather than, magically around him. He didn't have that superhero quality that the character would go on to have. He was just a very clever, erudite alien with an unstoppable thirst for knowledge on this kind of never-ending expedition to go everywhere and see everything. And some elements of that character have come and gone and been played up or played down. Sometimes he's more superhero, sometimes he's more thoughtful, quiet guy in the corner of the room. But the fact that we've had those choice and that kind of central core of the character has stayed true for 60 years, I think can only be due to William Hartnell.
Hear, hear.
Hear.
Excellent. Well, let's have a little bit more feedback, because we've had a few more bits coming over Twitter.
I've got mail.
I have heard from Philip Edney from the Sirens of Audio podcast. He is at Edney Philip. And Philip says, not enough praise is given to William Hartnell. People remember his fluffs, but an astounding actor who developed a role that would be treasured for decades. He had presence in every scene and is not the gruff, grumpy old man modern people think, but humour, nuisance and passion. That's really nicely summed up. He's managed to sum up in one tweet what I've been struggling to do for the entire episode, so well done, Philip. Next up, we have heard from the Susan Archives at Codec02. And they say, it was great. I loved all the companions, even the ones that were kind of thrown out. Yeah, there were 1 or 2 of those, weren't there? Harsh but fair. Next up, we have heard from 26 Glorious Years at 7up6389. And they say, it boasted a sense of creative variety in tone, content and presentation, arguably unparalleled in later years, and just how they managed to realise much of the first season in the confines of Lime Grove D is still a source of wonderment, a great spirit of adventure throughout. Thank you for that one, 7up. Yeah, that's another excellent point. And lastly from me, we have heard from Thomas Hines at Thomas H90175738. That one just rolls off the tongue. Thomas says, it's one of the most fascinating eras of Doctor Who. I love it. Hartnell is so good as the first Doctor. Thank you, Thomas. And Ian, I believe you've got quite a missive from our dear friend Dave
Yes,
Kitchen.
he sent me the PDF of his new book, Why I Love the William Hartnell Era. I would like to give it its first public performance. If everyone could sort of take their seats, I shall begin. The Hartnell era is, of course, my absolute favourite, so firstly, thank you for inviting me on twice to discuss it, which we did. I hope that as more people are able to watch this era, they see the First Doctor as I do. Wonderful, fun, authoritative, complicated, curious, kind, moody, and perfectly performed by William Hartnell. Only a very few stories in this era fail to fire, and even those which don't work are at least trying something new. This is an era always looking to push the television boundaries and explore strange new worlds. It has those wonderfully written historicals, each rich in drama and character. It has 4 remarkable Dalek stories. It has the second and third wittiest stories in Doctor Who's canon. It has the alien worlds of Vortis and Marinus and Skaro and Dido. So I nearly said a rude word. It has so many well-rounded... Dave's never going to forgive me for ruining his carefully written work. Anyway, it has so many well-rounded and memorable companions, including some strong female leads well before it was common. Thank you, Dave. It gives the show its ethos from the start. Always search for the truth. My truth is in the stars, and yours is here. And it gives the show its moral compass. You must travel with understanding as well as hope. Thank you, Dave concludes, for sharing your journey through this era with us.
Oh, well, thank you, David.
Would not have been the same without him, would it?
I think that deserves a round of applause. And if you'd like to get in touch, you will find all the various ways and means listed over our end credits. So, as we wrap this episode up, I'd just like to thank our guests one more time for coming on, Victoria and Tim. Before you go, let's have a little plug for your various podcasts that you've got on the go. Victoria, let's come to you first.
I do my Doctor Who musings at Gallifrey's Most Wanted. It is available anywhere that podcasts can be downloaded, and we have a pretty active Twitter feed where I think we first interacted with these lovely gentlemen at Gallifrey's MW Pod. But my oldest friend and pod mate, Ross, also talks with Jeff of Gallifrey Gothic at on the Runcible Report. Both of those are under the Gallifrey's Most Wanted heading.
Excellent. And they are required listening. I always listen in, never miss an episode. Thank you, Victoria. And Tim, tell us about your show.
The Doctor Who Missing Episodes podcast. If you go to Ask Jeeves and type in the Doctor Who Missing Episodes podcast, it is available on most podcast providers, I think. I'm on Twitter at Doctor Who Podcasters with a DR. It's been a while since we put one on, but I have a WhatsApp group set up for the next episode with some script in it and all the people who are going to be talking on it and everything. So
it really is going to happen.
At some point in the next year or two, we might put pen to paper.
If you've had even just the slightest of interest in the missing episodes, not wishing to make Tim too big-headed, but they go over all those stories in so much detail. You should have to pay for that sort of content. It's
if people can pay if they want.
Don't give them ideas.
And you do occasionally crop up on something here as well, don't you, Tim?
Occasionally, and one or two other things. Yeah, yeah. If I appear on someone else's, it means I don't have to do my own for another 6 months.
Yes. Right. So we're keeping you from your. Right.
Yeah.
On that note, we better finish up and let you get on. Thank you both so much for coming on. And next time round, we shall be taking a trip to the planet Vulcan.
Oh, I like Spock.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod, and you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback, or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music.
Why do you think children like you? Because you're rather a grumpy sort of person.
Oh, yeah. I think as I've said before, they find me a cross between the Wizard of Oz and Father Christmas, you know.